Welcome to the Mood Board, where we talk India, Australia, and day 2 from Nagpur. And I don't know anything else I come up with, really. Anything I want to talk about. I think I'm allowed to do these things. All right, let us start with the painfully obvious, I suppose. Rohit Sharma is very good. He played an exceptional innings in this test match, possibly his best test century at home, on par. It's all going on the screen today. On par with the 161 he made against England in 2021. In fact, a bit like that wicket, I think he scored here in a way that kind of made everyone else look a little bit silly. So if you remember back to that one, England did struggle quite a bit, but so did really, I think, probably every Indian batter on that surface outside of Czech's notes, Ashwin, who did bat very well, in fact. But that was a tough surface. I don't think this surface is on that level of toughness. I think it's tricky. Also, think it got a lot better today, which is something that we'll talk about slightly later. But there's absolutely no doubt, again, that Rohit Sharma just looks something very, very different to everyone else. And even if Jadeja or Akshar go on to make big runs, I don't think they did it when the pitch was playing as hard as it was for Rohit Sharma. Certainly throughout the majority of that day, it evened out. I haven't used the same graph that we used last time for Nagpur, but for the previous first-class games at Nagpur. But so far, this match has fairly evenly followed a similar script to what we've seen at Nagpur, which is the first innings is quite tricky. Then the pitch seems to even out when the second innings is getting played. And you could certainly see by the end, even when Australia got the second new ball, pitch just wasn't playing up as much as it had been earlier. But that just tells you that Rohit Sharma probably played even better than you're assuming he did. Well, I don't know how much you're assuming. You might be assuming he played absolutely brilliantly. But it is worth noting just how good he is at making scores against whoever gives him opportunity. So I think he's changed a lot as a batter over the last few years. We'll just bring up the other graph with that one as well. Even with some poor balls from Cummins, I think other players might have played him out a little bit more, especially someone like Pujara, right? But where Rohit was happy enough to score from him because that's where the opportunities were. But I think maybe the more interesting thing here is then going down to Boland. Obviously, everyone struggled against Boland, but everyone struggled pretty much on this pitch until the last session there, except for Rohit, and he was still scoring exceptionally slow against Boland. I didn't really expect to see him with a strike rate this low. Again, I think you've got a player who, a fast medium bowler who no one before this test really thought was suited towards Asian conditions. And I now see there's already been a question in the chat about whether Boland can potentially go play ahead of Stark in the next test, which tells you how much he's impressing people just from a little bit. Earlier in Rohit's career, I wonder if he might have tried to teach Boland a lesson, go after him a little bit heavier, score off him, hit him off his line and length even. Back then, he was more a guy who wanted to dominate all bowlers, whereas now there's much more of a zenness to his cricket, obviously. We've talked about it a lot in his captaincy, but it also really comes through in his batting. He's getting to that sort of mid-career Inzaman al-Haq stage where he doesn't have to dominate anymore. He just has to stay out there, and he's going to do that in any way that he can. He's still got his little Rohitness moments, that pull shot that he almost got caught out on, which I think he might have had one at Chipbook as well. I think I've got a memory where a similar thing might have happened there, or maybe he did go out in one of the series against England playing that same shot. There's a little bit of that there, but that's not an ego shot. That's almost a reflex. If you bowl short to him, he tries to put you into the crowd. But there does just feel to be that now he bats in a way that he's reacting to the game. And because he does that, he kind of shapes it naturally because of the way that he can score, because he scores so much quicker than everyone else. I thought it's a fantastic innings over both days. We'll go Muku's like a step ahead of me here. We'll go through to Ravindra Jadeja here. I think there's probably a bigger chat that we need to have about Jadeja I mean, of course, if you followed my work, you know I'm kind of obsessed with him. But I do have something that I probably will do as a feature video at some stage in this series. But I just want to go back to something. So India played West Indies at Rajkot in 2018. That was when Jadeja brought up his maiden 100. And I've talked about this sort of stuff a lot with all-rounders before, especially in his case, a left-handed all-rounder from India probably is the hardest way to build a career as a batter. But with him specifically, I think what you had is a situation where sorry, everyone. Don't want to press mute after yesterday when I forgot to unpress it. But I think what you have with Jadeja is a situation where he is trying to think of the best way. He was learning how to bat at the test level. The actual talent was there, but he was learning a little bit how to construct an innings. In fact, I still think he has a lot to learn about constructing an innings. And I've said before how much his batting reminds me of someone like Daniel Vittori or Imran Khan, in that they're almost better at not getting out than they are constructing an innings like a top level batter. But making that 100 at least allowed him to feel like that sort of a player. And he's very good at not getting out, which was perfect for this innings, by the way, because, at the situation he came in, he just had to hang around for a while. And once he did, he was set. And that really allowed him to, just be there. And then Akshar, obviously batting so well, made his innings look even better. But if you go back to that Rajkot innings, we could see that his home record is the one that has really, really drastically changed. Before that, he was averaging 31. Since then, he's been averaging almost 80 runs in test matches at home in India. And it's a phenomenal record. Ravi Shastri's talked about the self-belief. And I suppose that goes back to what I was saying a moment ago. It's almost like he understood at that stage he could make runs at this level. And that's a huge thing. There's a lot of stuff that commentators say and that former players say, which we kind of disregard now because we can look up records and we have more information and everything else. But there are many players that I've worked with where you just like Chandrapal Hemraj, if you've ever come across him, who I think made runs in India into one days a few years ago. I still don't think Chandrapal Hemraj realizes how good he could be as a player and that he belongs at the level that he should be. And I'm not sure he's ever going to work it out. There's a lot of players out there that feel that way. And you talk to major international cricketers, they'll tell you for the first 10 or 15 tests, sometimes you can feel like that. I remember talking to Mark Butcher once where he went out to bat against the West Indies. Literally, as he went out there, he was thinking to himself, should I even be out here? Those sorts of things happen a lot. Jadeja, because he was picked for his bowling specifically, probably wasn't even sure where in his headspace to put his batting for a long period of time. But, I suppose now there used to be a bit of a punchline, didn't it, about Jadeja making three first class triple hundreds before the age of 24. Now it's like, oh, okay, we get it. I just want to go on to something that I thought was really interesting today about Offspin. The commentators early on, and I think it was certainly Matt Hayden, I think it was Sunil Gavaskar and Mark Waugh, but it might have been some of the others that were talking about bowling over the wicket compared to bowling around the wicket. And it's a really, really interesting thing. They actually showed a pitch map at one stage where the average line and length for a line delivery in Australia would be compared to where he's bowling in India. And the Australian one was outside off stump, a little bit fuller, and the one in India was on the stumps and a little bit shorter. Part of that is just because he's bowling around the wicket, of course. And so it had just changed his line naturally. But the thing that I thought was interesting is they were talking about how it takes away his ability to get all the dismissals in play. And they were talking about edges to slip. At that stage, Ashwin had already edged one just wide of Steve Smith at slip. So I don't think bowling around the wicket takes that away. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't accentuate that kind of dismissal. And the other thing they talked about was that you don't get bowled as much when you are bowling, when an off-spinner is bowling around the wicket. Well, as you can see on this tasty graphic that we put together here, he's lying around the wicket and here's poor Sky driving through the gap. Doesn't happen as often. I think that is fair to say. It's probably going to get a mistake out of a batter more often if they're driving a little bit squarer. But the point still stands that he did get an edge from slip. And he did do that. And so it started to make me think a little bit more of off spin and bowling around the wicket and over the wicket. And so I actually, I did a bit of a look on this and I made up this graphic, which is very, very basic. And kind of after I did it, I wish I'd done a little bit more. But This is the three main kinds of off-spin. As I said, it's very basic, very reductive, but I wanted to kind of try and explain it. If you start with the Asian one here on your left, Asian off-spinners usually come a little bit wider on the wicket, and then they angle the ball into the stumps and then spin it further into towards the stumps. That's not what Western off-spinners do. Western off-spinners generally start a little bit closer to the stumps, although I reckon I've put him too close to the stumps here, old Western offie. But they usually start a little bit closer to the stumps, and then they either angle the ball away or drift the ball away in the air. It goes away from off stump, and then it comes back in. So what Gareth Batty calls this, he calls Asian off-spin, he would call that in to in, where you basically, the whole thing is in to in, whereas Western off-spin is out to in, where you're literally trying to get the ball outside the line and bring it back in. I should say that I put Asian Western just because that's the way, that's the main way it happens. But Dom Bess, for instance, was probably someone who at times bowled with the Asian one. So it's certainly something that can happen. But the reason these things happen in their different areas is because in Asia, you want to keep the stumps in play at all times. Bowled and LBW are, two of the most important ways to be able to get dismissals. And of course, that also brings in bat pads and everything else. The West is a little bit different. If you're bowling in sometimes South Africa, but certainly in New Zealand and England, you probably get a little bit more drift on the ball, which means you're creating that natural curve yourself. And in Australia, and then again in South Africa, you're going to get a little bit more bounce, which brings in caught behind and slips a little bit more. So it makes sense to have the players playing those shots just outside off stump. So that's why those two things happen. Obviously, in this particular situation, what we're talking about is Nathan Lyon and Murphy as well, coming around the wicket. I probably want to learn his name, being that he just took wickets today, but that's for another time. But with these guys coming around the wicket so much, it really started the whole conversation about this and about what they were doing wrong. The interesting thing about that is, if you go back and you listen to almost any Ricky Ponting conversation where he's ever talking about any one of his many off spinners that he had in Asia, he always wanted them to do things that the Asian spinners did more, which was either try that Asian method of coming wider and angling in, or bowling around the wicket a little bit more, which you don't see as much in some of the other places. The other thing he wanted was for them to bowl quicker. Nathan Lyon and Murphy have done that completely. Right, they've completely bought into that, and we'll talk a little bit more about Murphy's bowling later. But it's a really, really interesting thing from that perspective. And bowling around the wicket, what it does do is it really helps with the LBWs specifically, because if you land the ball in line and it straightens, it gives the umpire a really good view. Whereas if you look at the other two, there's the off stump issue where the ball might be hitting outside off stump. And the umpire obviously has to make a bit of a call on that, but also the angles, it's coming in from a different way. So I actually really like off spinners bowling around the wicket, but I also understand why it's probably something you would do more in Asia than you would do somewhere else. And I have numbers on this, of course, because I thought it was very interesting that it was War and Hayden, although obviously Sunil Gavaskar got involved in this as well. If you look at the numbers here for the rest of the world, you could see when off spinners bowl over the wicket, they average just under 40 around in the rest of the world. And this is the last 3 years. And when they bowl over the wicket, they might as well not be bowling. Around the wicket, they might as well not be bowling, right? That's a big, big discrepancy. You can see that in Asia, the discrepancy is not as big to begin with. So whether you bowl over or around the wicket, you're bowling in Asia and you're a finger spinner and you've been picked for your nation, you're probably pretty handy. But the interesting thing is that the pattern goes for both here, which is that bowling around the wicket is much better when you are bowling. So there's no way that everyone would have known that on the commentary team. This wasn't anything that I knew particularly coming in, but I thought this was really, really interesting, having a look at it. And there's a reason why Murphy and Lyon have both been coming around the wicket so much, and it's because they're probably looking at these same numbers and realizing that this is another way to do that. And I did look the other one is rest of the world. I should say that in every continent, and I think in every country I looked at, bowling over the wicket for an off spinner was better than bowling around the wicket. It was just the Asian style pitches that seemed to change that around a little bit. And it's worth saying that Australia took 6 wickets today. I think that's right. Or 6 wickets in the innings with off spinners bowling around the wicket. So they didn't. In some ways, you can't prove a negative because they barely bowled over the wicket. So it would have been hard for them to take wickets that way. But very, very interesting. Talking about one of the off-spin wickets, let's move on to Pujara, who is a man who does not sweep. that's what we know him as. I'm not sure who cleans up around his house, but I'm sure that he's much more likely to use a vacuum than a broom, based on what we've seen him play. When I went through the data, I couldn't even find him having played a slug sweep in his career so far, which was incredible. I found one in the last 5 years. I found one reverse sweep, 6 paddle sweeps, and 8 conventional sweeps. The one he did today, I kind of feel like it was almost like a combination. You could have marked it as either. I saw some databases give it as a paddle sweep and some give it as conventional. But either way, as you can see here, these are all the shots that he plays against spin. You're going to be shocked to know that the defensive shot is on top. As with most players, the flick is on top, but he's a very good player of the flick, easing the ball onto the leg side. It's a long way down before you get to any of the sweep shots. So from that perspective, it was obviously not something that he usually likes or needs, but he played one today and he was dismissed. There's been a lot of talk about intent from that particular shot, but I think in this particular case, I just think Pujara saw a terrible ball. It was a mile down leg stump. It was maybe slightly too short to play the sweep shot from. But even then, I think most confident sweepers would have just gone through with that shot and not had any problem at all. And I think in his case it was a late decision because he suddenly went, well, that's a dog shit delivery. I'm just going to paddle it around the corner and pick up 4 runs. Which as a person who does play the sweep shot, that's how I would have felt with it as well. But just back to the intent a little bit here. In tests, he attacks spinners far more at home than he does anywhere else, which I suppose makes sense. He's more comfortable there, understands the conditions. But I did find that interesting that his strike rate was the best in India of anywhere else. What I then had a look at was his home record against spin, because I don't think there's any of us who've been watching him over the last couple of years who would say he's the same kind of player that he used to be. So it's worth mentioning that he's not playing spin well at home anymore. Outside of a few balls of spin in the West Indies, his lowest average is at home. So that's in the last 5 years. And if you look on the right here, you'll see that early in his career, he's averaging a ridiculous amount against spin. That's a world-class mark. That's a sort of record you see from players like Kumar Sangakkara, Rahul Dravid, Yunus Khan, right? And he was in their class for a very, very long time. Last 5 years, I think there's no one who's watching Indian cricket who wouldn't say that some of these pitches have certainly got to a point where they're not spinning as much as they used to. That's fine. We put that to the side. Even so, this feels like a really, really drastic drop-off to me. And it'd be really interesting to go through maybe some of the individual dismissals that he's had and see if there's, some broader themes. I don't think, though, today, even if you wanted to say that it was involved, I just don't think you could say it was just a bad ball and he decided that the best shot to play against it was a sweep shot. Unfortunately for him, it did take a small puff of dust, got a top edge and through to the short fine leg, and he was gone. Let's stay with Todd Murphy, who took that wicket, of course, who had a very, very good debut. There's a lot of things that I liked about his particular bowling. He changed his pace like a senior bowler, and he moved from, I think they had a graph on the screen where he went from 85 to 90, 90 to 95, and 95 plus, and he was about a third in each. That's on purpose, right? Because I've seen him bowl in Australia, and I've never seen him bowl 95 plus consistently the way that he has before. He's really thinking about what he's doing. The other thing is, again, the bowling around the wickets. Him bowling faster and him bowling around the wickets is not something that he's done a lot in first-class cricket, because he wouldn't have to do that in Australia. Also, he hasn't played much first-class cricket. That was his first 5-wicket haul in first-class cricket. But there's just a couple of other things here that I wanted to mention. These are 2 debuts that people have had in Australian spinners in Asia let's say the modern era. Crazier's probably just holding on. I'm not sure that still is the modern era, but let's hold on to those as the modern era. You have Nathan Lyon, who took 5 wickets on debut in Sri Lanka. He took Kumar Sangakkara out with a great ball. Then he got Angelo Matthews, I think, not long after that, and then cleaned up the tail. He didn't really have to work that hard. Sri Lanka just sort of collapsed in that innings. It was very dramatic, but also a great way for Nathan Lyon to start. Then you've got Jason Krazier. If you're not aware of this, it's worth even just looking at the highlights of this test match. It was absolutely one of the most bizarre test matches to ever watch live. And Krazier's part in it was surreal. Absolutely. India just decided that it was going to be 6 or out. So he took 8 wickets in the second innings, but he'd already taken 4 in the first. So he took 12 wickets on debut and still went at, I don't know, I'm going to say conservatively 20 runs and over. That's what it felt like. There was just absolutely crazy batting. And Krejci's career gets even more weird because his next test, South Africa chased over 400 in the 4th innings at Perth against him, and he never plays again. So he takes 12 wickets, fails in his second test, and he's discarded forever. Lyon, of course, takes the 5 wickets in his first test and then goes on to have probably the best career that any Australian spinner's had outside of Shane Warne, certainly in terms of wickets, but maybe also at this point, when it comes to maybe the length of career and everything. It really is a remarkable career that Nathan Lyon has had. So all I'm saying is that Todd Murphy is going to fall somewhere between Nathan Lyon's career and Jason Krejci's career. But it is also worth pointing out that I saw all 3 of these debuts, and I would say that Murphy certainly bowled the best out of these 3 guys, even if the figures haven't quite looked as dramatic as Lyon's figures did, or Krejci's 12 wickets in a game. I think Murphy has been the best. I think Murphy has been the best young spinner I've seen for Australia, even before he played in this test, since I saw Lyon. So it's really interesting in that point of view. However, if you're going to talk about his 5 wickets, we can talk about how well he bowled. I think he bowled about 4 really poor balls. As you can see, the circle on the screen is showing you 2 of them. He did get very lucky. If you're an off spinner and you've pitched a ball outside leg stump and it's spinning further away, and you've managed to get Cheteshwar Pujara and Virat Kohli out, you've had, buy some Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's about to go up. Actually, don't buy Bitcoin. I have no idea about Bitcoin. I'm just saying, if I was Todd Murphy, I would do something like that. He basically bowled 2 one-day wides and got 2 of the best players to spin in the world out. So well done to him. One other little thing that I wanted to mention, and it's one of the things that I fixate on that maybe doesn't matter as much, but I want to talk about the very, very new ball. So in the first innings, if you have a look, or actually when Australia took the second new ball, Rohit Sharma was finally dismissed. He'd actually edged another ball from Steve Smith at slips, who dropped him just before this. So you can see on the left, there's his off stump doing a bit of a cartwheel. And of course, you may remember that's not the first cartwheeling. This very good pitch for cartwheeling stumps. We never talk about stuff like that enough. Very good pitch for cartwheeling stumps. But if you look at this middle section here, you'll see that, Warner obviously was bowled as well. And then it was when Khwaja went out. Why I'm bringing all this up is because we have had 3 wickets fall to very, very new balls in this game so far. And when Cummins took the new ball in India's first innings, he really, really struggled. And Rohit Sharma particularly punished him. So if you have a look at the stats and the runs per over, it really sticks out how bad a start Cummins had. I say that optimistically. Let's have a look. Here it is. So it was the first over, I think, and the 5th over. So the 3rd over, I think, was a maiden from Cummins. But the first over obviously went for a lot of runs. I think there was 1 edge for a boundary and then a couple of poor balls. And then a couple of overs later, there was another one. So in the first, I don't know what this was, probably 95 overs or something along that time, Cummins had bowled 2 of Australia's most expensive 3 overs. That is quite a dramatic start and a reversal from what we've seen when he got the second new ball, and also what we saw from Siraj and Mohammad Shami. This is clearly a pitch where spin is going to play a larger part, but there is something about that very new ball off this surface that has done something a little bit in the air at times, but a little bit off the pitch. And Cummins really wasted that, and that allowed India to get into a position where they could really take control of this game a lot more, and then go from there. And, it's also worth pointing out that if Cummins was bad, and he clearly was, that again, that goes back to Rohit Sharma for taking the opportunities. That's why having an opening batter who can hit boundaries makes such a big impact, because you have a smaller pitch map that you can go up against them. And if you make that mistake, generally they can get on a bit of a roll. And in this case, that start is probably one of the reasons that India is now so comfortably ahead in this game. Had they lost 1 or 2 early wickets and then they'd lost those wickets again in the middle, they would have been in a completely different situation. So weirdly enough, even though this is not particularly a new ball or a seam bowling pitch, missing out on even putting pressure on at the start of that innings has probably come back to haunt Australia quite a bit. You can also note that Nathan Lyon went for a lot of runs early on in Australia's India's innings as well. So there's a couple of mistakes there. Well, that's the end of the visual representation part of our chat. I'm going to go to a break. And while we have the break, we will, I'll troll through some comments and see if there's any other questions worth answering. There's a couple of really good ones I saw that were lined up beforehand. So I'll get to those first, but I'll get some others and I'll be back with you in a moment. There is something wrong in the cricket world, and while it may not be a conspiracy, there does seem to be a movement towards leaving more grass on the wicket, and thusly, the global batting average has dropped. If a similar thing has happened to you in your personal life, try Manscaped. Their Lawnmower 4.0 will help you trim any unwanted pubic grass. And once your downstairs track is taken care of, you can also use Manscaped's liquid formulations. So before heading outside, use the Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant to stay cool in the heat. And if you've been playing too many games recently and you need some help with your strip, why don't you go and get their Crop Reviver? I think I may possibly have taken all of this analogy too far. But the point is, Manscaped sells items that allow you to shave your pubic itch pitch. Use the code REDINKER, all one word, which is the name of my podcast, and you can get a 20% discount and free worldwide shipping while you curate your special strip like a team of sweaty men hoping it doesn't rain. Oh, okay. I was going to answer a question by a guy, but I see he's now spammed the room 83 times. So I think we can take him out. All right. Let us get, there were some good questions today and some that I was going to put into the show, but I didn't get time to writing them. So great work by, well, let's start with Andrew. Actually, I probably could have put this one in the show. Andrew says, if a bowler wants to apply ointment to their bowling finger, surely this will require permission and supervision of the umpire. I don't believe that does, actually, Andrew. I think if you're taking that ointment and it's still on your finger and you're rubbing it on the ball, then obviously that is a completely different situation. But I don't think ointment in general would need to be looked at from that perspective. I mean, for those who don't know, players, well, in the reverse swing days, players would use, mints, sunscreen. Traditionally back in the old days, I suppose players put Vaseline on the ball. Some bowlers would have that. There's been a crackdown in baseball on this sort of thing. I'm not particularly, unless he was just trying to get it to reverse swing. And I'm not, I missed this when it happened. I didn't see it happen live, so I'm not sure when it happened in the game. But unless he was trying to get the ball to reverse swing, I'm not sure from that perspective. But if he's actually putting a outside cream onto the ball and, blurry footage, etc., then he should certainly have to go to the match referees, and he will get the normal penalty. Won't he? He'll get, what is it, 40% of your fee or 80% of your fee? I mean, actually, tampering with the ball is like one of the smallest penalties you can get, unless you do it in a way that embarrasses the Australian public. But that's another conversation for another time. DM95 says, do you think Jadeja can end his career with an average over 40? That's a really interesting question, because some of that is going to depend on how long he plays when he quits, because, there's every chance that as a bowler, he can go longer than he does as a batter, and perhaps his batting gets to a point where he's no longer doing particularly well. So it is very, very possible on that, from that perspective, that he might disappear a little bit earlier with his batting. Like, his batting might go down and he might still be a very good world-class bowler. Another thing is that because they've got Akshar and because they keep finding these, incredible finger spinners out there, maybe his bowling slips and his batting keeps him in the team. And if that's the case, he's going to put an even higher premium on it. I would bet on an average over 40, but I think there's so many things. It's funny. Just recently, I've been looking at the stretches of different players, and when they have drop offs and everything else. A player at Jadeja's level really should probably gets the opportunity to play beyond his best, and that's usually when you drop off. So you surge your batting average in your prime, and then you get to a point where everyone's like, "Oh, he's so great, we can never drop him," and then your batting average sort of slips back down over the last 3 or 4 years. Please see Ricky Ponting. So from that point of view, either is possible. But if you're asking me if he's a player who could average over 40, I have no doubt that is a possibility from where he is right at the moment. Where does he rank among the all-time all-rounders? There's a lot of all in that question. He's very, very high. As I said, I want to do a video on him shortly. I've been thinking about this a lot, and the video will probably be this if I get around to making it, which is if you were drafting a player for Test cricket right at the moment, and you could, you had access to anyone, and you wanted to be successful in the next 2 years, Jadeja's probably the player you draft, right? Like he's the one where you just look at and go, okay, he's the player that can have the most impact on a team. His his bowling might not be as good away from home, but his batting will back it up so that you still have 5 bowling options available to you. And he gives you at worst a world-class number 7, and at best a really good number 6. Plus, we've seen him bat higher than that when he needs to. Probably can't go any much higher than 5, and even then, it's only going to be on occasion. And I didn't think he looked particularly good when he was moved up the order. He's very well suited to that sort of 6, 7, 8 period just because of the way he bats. But from that perspective, all time, it's a really, really tricky one. I suppose once I get finished with the best test players of all time, I'd love to have a look at that. I would have thought at the moment his record would look really, really similar to Keith Miller's. Keith Miller's thought of as one of the greatest all-rounders of all time. And Keith Miller's probably another bowling first, but really good batting all-rounder. And I would probably argue that Keith Miller probably batted too high when he didn't need to. And the way he batted probably would have been suited to batting 6 or 7 as well. But that's, for another day. Kyle says, often hear announcers talk about spinners trying to put more revs on the ball, but rarely about them putting less one so the balls go straight. Are they relying on natural variation, or does this happen? So a top-class batter should be able to pick if a bowler is putting less revolutions on the ball, or certainly if they're putting so few on the ball that it's going to go dead straight. If you want the ball to go dead straight, there's a couple of different ways to do it. There's overspin, there's underspin, and then the third option, of course, is just waiting for natural variation to play its part. So sometimes you just get your action wrong. Sometimes, for whatever reason, the ball just goes straight on. So most international spinners are putting revs on the ball because when you put the reason that you always want to put revs on the ball is by putting revs on the ball, you're actually affecting the path of the ball and then the bounce of the ball as well. So the sideways or the straight movement is obviously the dramatic one that we see on TV. It's the easiest thing to see from the camera angle that we have. But there's so many other things going on. The drop of the ball and the bounce of the ball are very, very important as well. Not to all spinners. Someone like Jadeja we talked about yesterday, probably maybe slightly less so. But a lot of other spinners, especially Ashwin and Lyon in this game, and even Murphy by the look of him, they're trying to get the ball to drop and everything else. And if you look at Akshar Patel, it was one thing that we talked about in the video I did on him, is that he actually undercuts the ball quite a lot. So his balls actually land fuller than a normal spinner's would. So if you're trying to get the ball to go straight, you can do that. That's always been something that has happened. I think when we got close-up TV footage, I think spinners started to do it more and more. And you can see that a lot. But I do remember a great conversation where Nasser Hussain was on the TV once going on and on about, Graham Swan's undercutter and saying what a genius Graham Swan was. And Graham Swan was in the change rooms saying to all the players, nah, just didn't spin. So in that case, Nasser Hussain's trying to do what you're talking about and explain it. And that, it's a bit like the wobble ball, right? Like as someone who assesses over the wobble ball, sometimes it's like, that's definitely, no, actually, maybe he was trying. Oh, I don't know. So yeah, there you have it. DM says, how do you think Murphy's bowling will translate to other conditions? He's bowled really well in Australia so far. If you can bowl really well in Australia and you can bowl really well in Asian conditions, it's a pretty good start as a finger spinner, right? I would say, based on this, he looks better than a young Lyon did in Asia. And Lyon was a really good bowler at the start of his career as well. But I would say that he looks even better from that perspective. I think with him, what I want to see is maybe a flatter pitch in Asia, but then also maybe a flatter pitch in somewhere like England to see what other skills he has. Watching him, in fact, Dan Breddick sent me a message while the game was going on today. He said that other than the actual off spinner, which Nathan Lyon's pure off spinner is still better than Murphy's, everything else Murphy does is really advanced for someone who's barely played any cricket, and he's very good at it. All those things actually bode quite well for a career. As I was saying before, more impressed by his debut, and I was pretty impressed by him before he got in from the highlight packages and watching Victoria play in a couple of Shield games. I was already sort of on board. I probably would. I'm not a big fan of taking 2 off spinners in, and even I would have done would have picked him for this test. And I hadn't seen him in the nets, and from everything I've heard, he was even better in the nets. But I do think it will translate. But because he's so young, we can say that his skills should translate, but he's going to have to learn all these different things. And again, at this stage, he's probably going to learn them more as a traveling player with Australia. You would assume that, the next few times they need a second spinner in the squad, he probably gets to go at the moment, which means that he'll get to travel a little bit more, but he may not get to play as much first-class cricket, which is, it depends on how you want your players to develop. Bob says that last session was hard to watch. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about this. We talked about that nag ball pitch, and I went back and I looked at those 4 first-class games. I think it was 3 late December and 1 in mid-January. All of them share the exact same pattern that we saw here. And I want to get into that more because there's obviously a couple of questions. In fact, I'll go straight to the next question from Chitra about the 2 left-handers and 80-run unbeaten stand for more than an hour. Can the pitch still be called biased? I don't care if the pitch is called biased. That's for other people. It spins in India. It was going to spin. I think the bigger question is, were they trying to have it so it was just favouring one team more on one side of the wicket? Which again, Kartik wrote a piece on Cricket Info that's quite interesting. If you haven't read that, go and have a look at that. But the point I want to make with this particular thing is, this is why when we're talking about these sorts of things, we need to factor in everything, because there's a whole bunch. There's one guy asking the same question over and over again who got kicked out of the room because it was annoying everyone. Whereas people are going completely on results. One of the reasons they had this 80-run stand is because it was quite clear that pitch had got a lot easier. You might be able to factor in the fact that Murphy and Lyon got tired as well. That is very possible. That at first I thought also that the ball had got a little bit soft, but to be fair, even when they got that newer ball, I didn't think they looked as brutal as they had. I would say that some of the balls that really, really misbehaved the most were probably the ones to the left-handers, but they weren't doing it from dangerous positions. And because Australia doesn't have a bowler who can spin the ball back in to the left-handers, other than Marnus, but really doesn't have anyone who can spin the ball back in. That should be a much bigger advantage for the Indian bowlers. So when you're saying something like this, it's really interesting. You've got to factor in everything, right? So let's say that the Indian curators did try and make sure that this pitch was harder for left-handers to bat on. And then they specifically were hoping it would dry out and the foot marks would then help it. That shouldn't help off spinners to left-handers. That should help left arm finger spinners to left-handers, which India have 2 of. But more importantly than that, you have Jadeja, who we just said has been very, very good. And for Jadeja to be a player who has got through the Indian system, who has these 3, triple hundreds when he's very young in first-class cricket, who's gone on to be a very good batter in Indian conditions, he also has to be an extremely decent player of off-spin. I don't know if he's a great player of off-spin because it's hard to be that as a left-hander in these sorts of conditions, but he has to be at the very least a very decent player of that. I thought Akshar batted very well also. But you've got to factor all these things in. The pitch, no one who watched that last session was thinking that the pitch was playing the same way it was in the first session when the Indian batters were struggling, right? And when it was the right-handers who were struggling as well. Sometimes just things change. And if you look at the Nagpur pitch on, over those 4 games I'm talking about, the first innings was really tough. Second innings was easier. The third innings was easier. And then the last innings usually gets tough again. It's very possible that will happen. It's also very possible that India just have better bowlers suited to this particular surface and the Australian lineup, which is also why if they did leave those parts of the pitch drier, it makes sense. They're the ones who are going to spin it back in. Lots of different pieces to these things. But it's all very interesting as well. Because it starts early in the morning again, I want to see what happened. Because so far, I would say there's been easier to bat in the afternoon sessions, and I include even some of the Australian tail end innings in this, than I think it has been to bat in the first 2 sessions. Don't know if that's a moisture thing or what the situation is there, but so far there's this pitch looks very patterny, if that makes sense. Busker says Scott Boland was very effective and unlucky. Should he be selected for the second test given the control he provides? So we had a couple of questions like this. Someone else obviously saying he should play against Start. Yeah, I didn't know how it would go in this test just because I kind of always go back to the old Stuart Clark thing of bowling in Asia, where I just watched Stuart Clark and I was like, you can be as clever as you want and as skillful as you want. If the pitch doesn't give you anything, um, I'm not sure what you can make of it. That's not how I felt with Scott Boland. And I thought he was incredibly accurate. They put his pitch map up at one stage. And you're right. I think he was very effective. And, whether he was unlucky or not, well, I think him and Cummins probably bowled a couple of balls that haven't missed the stumps by that much. So I suppose that a couple of times they've been a little bit unlucky from that perspective. But I haven't thought of it, Boland as being unlucky. I thought of him bowling very, very well. And India respecting that. And and you could see I think there was one mini spell where he started to bowl poorly and they started to score off him. And I'm sure those were some of the loosest balls he'd bowled all the way through. But he's bowled a very good line and a very good length, and he's very clever and very skillful. Incredibly impressed with him. I don't know if I'd want to be in a selector's position to be thinking whether he goes into the second test if Stark is fit. And that leads into beautifully the next question from Nishant, who says, they do need a left armour in their bowling to create rough for Nathan Lyon to bowl to. So a few people have already answered this. Nishant, we've done the research on this. It doesn't matter whether he has a left armour or not a left armour in his team. Doesn't affect Nathan Lyon's numbers and doesn't affect test bowlers from what we can tell. And the reason is because even if you have a left armour, it's usually just one or maybe two, and they just don't make the same kind of tracks. And even then, you're talking about it happening right towards the end of the game. Anyway, by that stage, perhaps the off spinners are better off just bowling at the stumps when the pitch is already breaking up, especially in somewhere like Asia, rather than bowling wide and hoping one rags back in. It's a really interesting thing. Sometimes I think the two things I've thought the most about, and they're very hard to prove, but having worked with cricket teams, they get really obsessed with wind and short boundaries, and they get really obsessed with foot marks. And I understand both because they do change the way that you think, play, and plan. But sometimes they get a little bit too in their head with those sorts of situations. Look, we've all seen, Moeen Ali or Nathan Lyon throw one wide, or Ashwin throw one wide into the foot marks from a left-hander occasionally and get wickets. But what we haven't seen is that matches where left armers are prevalent, that the off spinner has a better record to right-hand batters than they do in other test matches. It just doesn't seem to exist at the moment. If someone from the ECB or BCCI or Hawkeye or CricViz can prove that wrong, I'd be more than happy from it. But me and Amol Desai we tried to gerrymander the stats as much as possible, and we just couldn't make it work. But it's certainly something that a lot of people believe. I just don't think Mitchell Starc would have bowled enough to make foot marks at this stage of the game that would have changed it. And also, I don't think that was the plan anyway. I think they wanted this other around the wicket thing. And I don't think Australia's in a bad situation because, there's no foot marks for Murphy and Lyon to be bowling to. Bob says the Indians have all faced Cummins in the IPL, so they know they can hit him. Yeah, that you can say that about Rabada, and he's still going to take a bunch of wickets against you. Cummins has bowled absolutely spectacularly against India in test matches before. They were hitting him because he was bowling poor balls. I don't think specifically they were sitting there going, this is that guy that, they hit a six from in the power play one time. They know how good he is, especially in this format of the game. And he bowled some bad balls. When he bowled really well, he bowled probably, two spells? Second new ball one and one, maybe three really good spells. Didn't look like they were sitting there going, this is the guy we hit in the IPL then, and that's the difference, right? Sometimes it's just about how you go. Outwards is the best says, Todd Murphy, Nathan Lyon replacement. So I've had people in the cricket community, people online, I'm sure when I talk to my dad about cricket, he'll be bringing this up. Is Todd Murphy a Nathan Lyon replacement? Some people are like, now, I'm not sure that a Nathan Lyon is someone that you want to get rid of straight away. He's been so effective in so many different kinds of conditions. I wouldn't say that India is his, in some ways that, you might get someone like Graham Swan where you throw him into India and he just looks like he's born for India. I'm not sure as much Nathan Lyon is that kind of spinner. I think he does like the extra bounce of some, the pitches outside of India just because he gets more overspin on the ball. Todd Murphy at the moment looks like he could be a replacement. I wouldn't be rushing him. I'd want him to play as much cricket as possible in as many places as possible. When when you've got a good situation. If it gets to the point where, you know, he's regularly outbowling Nathan Lyon, and you also think he will outbowl Nathan Lyon on pitches that don't do much, I think that's the point at which you start to have a look at whether there is an opportunity to bring him in. Maybe, but in some ways, are they not in a great position where Nathan Lyon's probably going to play at least another couple more years? They could even, you know, have a curability agreement, which it's probably only going to make sense if you're an Australian, but you know, and slowly Lyon eases himself out as Murphy gets more experienced around the world. But I don't think there's any rush to do it unless Murphy is just absolutely so much better that there's no argument, and in all conditions. Nathan Lyon, I think Nathan Lyon's main strength is how good a bowler he is in so many different conditions. So I don't think I would particularly be throwing away a spinner like that straight away. What it might do, though, is open up a lot of opportunities once they have Cameron Green back. I think that's where it's really interesting now. Before, Murphy would have only played when it was, you know, in Asia, or the odd pitch that spun outside of Asia when it was absolutely going to be ragging. Whereas now they can actually go, well, we can just take, you know, 3 seamers and 2 spinners into games at any time if we want. You still get back to the fact that they're fairly similar kinds of off spinners, although not exactly like for like, but they're also not that radically different from each other, that I do think that causes some issues. What have we got here? Oh, Richwick says commentary is generally being piss poor. Some saving grace stuff from DK. Do you think we will get an option of people like you, Bharat, and Harsha on comms? When, if yes, yes, I do. I think we've already seen some of the people in India look at the dual streams, and I think you'll see that more and more going ahead. Obviously, other sports are already doing things like that. There's a new app that's come through in America. I think it does basketball games. I don't know if it does any other American sports, where people can commentate legally on basketball. I don't know, with their friends, I assume, which means that, you know, in what you're talking about, you know, me, Harsh, and Barrett could get together one time if we're all bored and do something like that. I don't know how the technology and everything else works on that, but I have seen that that is certainly the case. So I think naturally the technology will allow that more and more. Also, you can just commentate from anywhere now. You know, for TalkSport, since COVID, I don't think I've been on a tour. You have the ability to sync the sound, you know, all together, so it sounds live as it's coming through from the commentary. TV companies have obviously done that at times as well, although not as much. They generally always send people out. BBC have done that as well. I think SEN. Well, yeah, I've done it for SEN, so SEN have done it as well. So I think there's going to be more and more options with commentary going ahead. I think it's really, really interesting what people do, because if it was me and I was running a TV company, and the same for radio, but certainly with TV, you're thinking, why would I spend millions and millions of dollars for a bunch of commentators that only appeal to a certain demographic? Because actually, I can spread the wealth and I can have different kinds of commentary teams available. I can pay people all good wages where they're, you know, they're still involved. But instead of giving one person, you know, well, I know one commentator was on $1.5 million a year. And this was, what, 5 or 10 years ago. So I don't know what some of the commentators are on, but they're on very good money. But that person is really grating. Maybe, let's say 30% of the population love that person and 70% don't. Can you not give different options, comedy options, all sorts of things? It's one of the reasons we set up 99.94. We really wanted to be in that space. We haven't quite got the kind of funding that we've wanted to get there yet. But I think commentary should be about choice. And, you know, I think I wrote my first article on that a very, very long time ago. And I don't, you know, probably 2009, 2010. I haven't changed my mind since. I think there should be, yeah, I try and do the best job I can as a commentator, and still get abuse from people who don't like the sound of my voice, don't like what I talk about, don't like that I'm Australian speaking on English radio, you know, don't like that I sound English speaking on Australian radio, all these different things that you get. And, you know, you can't please everyone. But what you can do is, there's a lot of talented people in cricket that I think are very good as commentators. I also think that would allow us to have, the problem with commentary at the moment is a lot of these people don't do any commentary for a little while. Then they suddenly do a big series And I think commentary is something, and I haven't done TV commentary, so I'm a little bit different on this, but certainly in radio commentary, there's a real rhythm to it. It's really hard to drop yourself back in on ball one and get it right. And I think if you're a professional and you're doing it every month, that's a little bit different. If you've not done it for 3 months and suddenly you have to do it and you do it for 2 weeks, then you're doing a T20 tournament, now you're doing a test series, everything is different. So yeah, thank you very much also, Ritwick, for the can't get my words out, super chat. If you want your question guaranteed, please feel free to do that. Thank you to that. Sugar on Acid says, really interesting to see this comparison. Oh, so he's talking about the off spin around the wicket. In my youth, I naively thought off spin would be more dangerous around the wicket, like a left arm seamer swinging in. Yeah, so I agree. And I remember having lots of conversations. I was vice captain of a cricket team, and I was a leg spinner, and we had an off spinner, and our captain was a fast bowler. And I would always encourage our off spinner to do that. But I think it's twice. And I remember Glenn Maxwell telling me this years ago that he moved from over the wicket to around the wicket because it helped him complete his action a little bit more. There are some off spinners, I think, that there is actually a technical reason why they bowl better around the wicket than they do over the wicket, which I think is a really, really interesting subplot to all this, especially when you think about that's generally when they bowl to left-handers, which might be part of the reason they look even more brutal against left-handers than they do to right-handers sometimes. But I'm with you. I would have thought that going around the wicket just makes more sense. But it was really today when the commentators just kept talking about it, and I thought, well, I'll just look it up and see what the numbers say. And I was shocked that Asia was the only place where bowling off spin around the wicket was that good. So I don't know. We've all learned something today, haven't we? All right, I'm going to go through the chat and just see if there's any more super chats there or anything else that I want to get to. So I'm just going to play a couple of quick ads, and then I will be back with you in momento.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
There is something wrong in the cricket world, and while it may not be a conspiracy, there does seem to be a movement towards leaving more grass on the wicket, and thusly, the global batting average has dropped. If a similar thing has happened to you in your personal life, try Manscaped. Their Lawnmower 4.0 will help you trim any unwanted pubic grass. And once your downstairs track is taken care of, you can also use Manscaped's liquid formulations. So before heading outside, use the Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant to stay cool in the heat. And if you've been playing too many games recently and you need some help with your strip, why don't you go and get their Crop Reviver? I think I may possibly have taken all of this analogy too far. But the point is, Manscaped sells items that allow you to shave your pubic itch pitch. Use the code REDINKER, all one word, which is the name of my podcast, and you can get a 20% discount and free worldwide shipping while you curate your special strip like a team of sweaty men hoping it doesn't rain.
Arian says, were Kohli and Pujara's wickets pure luck, or did Australia plan it? If Australia planned for Pujara to play a sweep shot, being that, I'd have to go back to my numbers, but I think of the 1,500 or 2,000 balls he's played against spin, that was his 14th in the last 5 years. I think those numbers are right. Certainly, it was his 14th. If they planned for him to play a sweep shot, that is the greatest plan of all time. So they certainly didn't with him. Again, with Kohli, if they had a leg slip in, I just think there weren't that many balls that Murphy got wrong, which is really quite interesting. So I saw someone in the comments saying, Murphy got very, very lucky. And he did twice. Don't get me wrong. But this wasn't a case of a bowler bowling a lot of balls that weren't particularly good. This wasn't like Dom Bess when he took his wickets in Sri Lanka, for instance, or even Jason Krejci. This was a case of a bowler putting on a lot of pressure and then getting a couple of bonus wickets out of it. And if he'd finished up today with 3 for 80 odd, or I don't know what his final figures were, but 3 for 70 odd, I still would have thought he bowled really well. The extra couple of wickets are nice. And, Scott Boland's probably sitting there going, I wouldn't mind them. But then again, you could say that Scott Boland has probably had some very good luck so far in his career, so he can't really argue either. Avanish says, should have given Marnus longer spells. He got a few to grip and turn. He also got a few to be full tosses and to be short. Look, he's a part-timer. I don't think you really want him to bowl long spells. You probably want him to bowl for 3 overs while he's feeling confident. I think if he bowls for longer, I think he'll find that. It'd be interesting to see, but I would think that they would start to work him over. And maybe your best chance of getting him is sort of fresh as he comes in. He's going to bowl a lot of bad balls. I think Mark Wall was talking about him coming on a lot. And I get the theory behind it, but I also feel that there were times where Australia had built pressure back up and Marnus coming on allowed easy scoring options for India, which sort of, let that pressure go a little bit. I don't think, I'm not blaming him. He's a part-timer and Pat Cummins would have expected that as well. When Green wasn't fit and Agar wasn't playing, there was always a chance that whoever the fifth bowler was would get a little bit of stick at times. But he did get a couple of rip. He bowled a couple of really, really nice deliveries. And that's what he could do. He's a proper, old-fashioned part-time leg spinner in that you're going to get some balls that you can't play and you're going to get some balls that waist high full tosses that you might hit straight to point. Mid-wicket. Farah says, should Warner be considered moving down the middle order and Renshaw opening? It's a really interesting question. I think that last time Warner moved down professionally, was it Sunrisers or was it when he played at St. Lucia with me? Not sure he particularly wanted to go down at that time. Warner is traditionally not an opening batter. I know he's made himself into one, but I think if you look at the early part of his career, he certainly batted in the middle order quite a bit for New South Wales when he first came in. These days, it's almost hard to think of him in that position. I think he either plays and opens or doesn't. But what you're saying is maybe not completely incorrect. Although I don't think both Warner and Renshaw will be playing next Test match anyway. Is my guess. Outworth is the best. Says Lance Morris would have made more impact than Boland. I mean, Boland bowled fantastic. What are we talking about? Lance Morris, Boland went at like a run and a half and over, put pressure on at all times, allowed Australia to pull back what was a comically bad start from Pat Cummins. Lance Morris could have gone at 6 runs and over, maybe 7 runs and over. And he also could have taken 5 wickets. You can't prove a negative, but to say that Lance Morris would have been the difference from what we've seen of that surface and what we've seen of Scott Boland bowling, I think you'd have to say that he's bowled really well. He might not have got wickets, but, sometimes those things happen. I doubt that Lance Morris would have taken more. I doubt that Lance Morris would have bowled better. He might have taken wickets because those things sometimes happen. And he might have changed the way that the game went in different ways, just the way that fast bowlers tend to. But he also could have gone for 6, 7, 8 runs and over. That's also possible. APAD said, Warren often said spinners shouldn't bowl at more than 80 kilometers per hour, but in the last 10 years, more successful spinners in the subcontinent have actually bowled faster. I think spinners everywhere are bowling faster. APAD, I don't think it's just a subcontinental thing. In fact, even studies in England would probably, as far as I'm aware, the first scientific studies about spin bowling suggested that people had bowled it too slow. I think the amount of revolutions that Warren got on the ball and the way that he ambled in, I'm not sure he could have bowled leg spin much faster without ripping his arm and elbow and finger off, shoulders, I should say shoulder more, and with him, and wrist and finger off. So I don't think from that perspective there was anything that he could have done. When you're putting that, the more revolutions you put on the ball, the slower the ball goes down to the other end. So that's why off cutters don't slow down as much as back of the hand slower balls do. And generally, that's why leg spinners are slower than off spinners as well. I think there's an optimum speed. I shouldn't say optimum. That's the wrong way of putting it. I think there is certainly a faster speed that you can bowl. And I certainly think in Asia, you certainly need to bowl spin a little bit quicker. And that's probably been another one of Australia's consistent problems, taking spinners over there who either aren't used to bowling quick and trying to, or who aren't able to bowl quicker. It's something that Gareth Batty's talked about a lot. Me and him have bounced this around of how hard it is. I can't remember who the spinner was. There was a spinner we were watching who was trying to put pace on. It might have been Jack Leach. Who was trying to put pace on mid-match, and it just went horribly wrong because it's just not a particularly easy thing to do for someone who doesn't do it naturally, who's a really, a proper spin bowler, not just a roller type spin bowler. It's why I really respect what Kuldeep Yadav has done. I don't think I've ever seen a spin bowler transform themselves in pace quite the way that he has as a wrist spinner. I think we've seen finger spinners do that occasionally. But yes, I do think that the old 80 kilometers an hour, when you look at the slowest balls on Hawkeye and Test cricket spinners, I think it's Stuart McGill, Matt Parkinson, and Shane Warne. And so Matt Parkinson's kind of the one who sticks out there. But remember that Stuart McGill and Shane Warne were putting such massive revolutions on the ball. Rashid Khan doesn't do that. Anil Kumble didn't do that. Shahid Afridi didn't do that. And I think I've always thought, and Anil Kumble was the person who kind of taught me this, was that just getting side spin is just like one very small part of spin. And you need to do it, and it's quite handy. And it's the one that makes the selectors like you the most. It's not always the one that makes you the most effective. And I think bowling quicker, bowling. The other thing that Shane Warne would have said back in those days, and I'm positive I've heard him say this before, is you want the seam perfectly straight. No spinner bowls with the seam perfectly straight anymore. And we now realize that gives you much more natural variation. So as good as Shane Warne was, the knowledge goes on. What Bill O'Reilly and Clary Grimmett had done didn't work. Watch old clips of Bisham Beatty. He was so incredibly slow, right? It just wouldn't fit bowling at that speed in the modern game. But if Bisham Beatty and Shane Warne were in the modern game, they would be different. And that's how your environment shapes what you become as a cricketer, unless you're Matt Parkinson. Last one, Nishant says the actual series begins from the second test. Cam Green, Hazelwood, and Stark, maybe even Travis Head. I think they'll struggle to bring Travis Head in if they're bringing Cam Green in, Hazelwood and Stark. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, you're talking about 3 seam bowlers that might have an impact. Green obviously helps with the batting. Don't see Head coming in. I mean, the series has started. I think it's a really good test match. Right up until that last session, I said yesterday, if India got a lead of around 100, that I thought Australia still had a chance. They were obviously going to have to bat better than they did in the first innings, but I thought the conditions were going to be in their favor. And had they managed to get the wickets out, then they would have got a pretty comfy last session to bat in, albeit against better quality bowlers in those conditions, and in Ashwin's case, in every condition, I suppose. But I think it's a pretty good test match as it is, Nisha. Let's take it for what it is, which is a lot of fun at the moment. We're going to be back here. We've done 2 days in a row. I don't want to say every day because I might, ruin my run. But at this stage, we're going to try and do a mood board at the end of each day. So if you like the mood boards, if this is something that you're enjoying, please like, review, subscribe, press the bell icon, support us on Patreon, follow me down the street. Wear a t-shirt with my face on it, whatever you need to do to get the word out there. Huge thanks. So many people were in the chat today. Try not to spam. If I haven't got to your question, either do it as a super chat or just take it as the fact that it's a question I've probably already kind of answered or I'm no longer interested in, or don't have an answer to in some cases. Although that's very rare for me, to be fair. But please continue to support us. We're going to be trying to do these every day. We've got a couple of more videos on the Women's World Cup. If Women's World Cup starts, in about 4 hours? Is that right? I think that's right. So please, we'll be doing some stuff on that as well. There's a really cool video that we've already done on the batters from the Women's World Cup. I'm probably off now to have a bit of a snooze and then get up and watch the next game. And when I get up to watch the first game in the Women's World Cup, I'll probably start doing my piece on the women in the World Cup and their bowling as well. But huge thanks to everyone for coming on again today. And I will see you again next time.